Hi, everybody!
Weapons-based fighters aren't all that common in the fighting game space. Off the top of my head, I can only think of Soul Calibur, Last Blade, and Samurai Showdown. There are of course additional games that are weapons-based fighters, but these are the biggest ones, and Last Blade isn't all that big since the last game came out in '98. So with that in mind, we're going to make a list of characters from the Trails universe. Since I'm such a new player to Sam Show, I don't feel I'm qualified to say if a character fits into that universe. So with that out of the way, I will use Soul Calibur as my framework. But they could potentially appear in any weapons-based fighting game, so use your imagination a little on this one. I will cover how I think the character would play though. Okay, you knew Reen had to make the list. I love the character, and I've said on streams, if Reen was to make any fighting game, I would make him my main in that game even if he was garbage tier. I think Reen should be a mid-speed character in his base form. If you know anything about the Cold Steel arc, you'll know Reen has his ogre powers, so I think he should have 4 stances based around that. His standard one, where he's an average speed mix-up focused character, his Cold Steel 2 based ogre form, where he comes to accept it as part of himself and gets a small boost in speed and strength. A third form, where he has lost control, which I won't get into detail about so I don't spoil things for my editor. And a fourth based off where Reen is in his journey during Trails into Reverie. Since we know Spirit Unification is actually a technique used by practitioners of the Eight Leaves One Blade School of Swordsmanship, I think this would make Reen a fun, if oddball, character to play as. I feel like Reen should also have his speed boosted in each form, and each subsequent stage should gain more and more complex and longer combo strings. So how do you balance this unique to Reen mechanic? I feel it should be tied to Reen's super meter or a specific meter to him. Doing certain presses would then allow you to access the different forms. Also, in the mode where Reen is going berserk, I feel his health bar should drain slowly as well. Of course, Reen will suit more advanced players who will have a need for speed. I couldn't make a video on Trails characters in fighting games without including Estelle. If Estelle had never been invented, the Trails series would have turned out massively different, and it might not have gained some of the limited popularity it currently enjoys. Estelle would play a lot like Killik, but a bit different. I imagine Estelle hitting a little bit harder and a little bit faster, but with less sidestepping involved in her moveset. Basically, because Estelle is one of the most popular characters in the Trails franchise, she would be a good guest character in a fighting game. She'd certainly get Trails fans to take a look at any potential fighter she'd be in. Ultimately, she'd be a simple-to-use, beginner-friendly character. Not all the DLC characters have to be monsters. Lloyd is an interesting one, as I can't think of many Tonfa users in fighting games. Lloyd should be a character of middling speed and be the definition of middle of the road, since that's the role he takes on in whichever Trails games he appears in. He does a lot well, but not exactly a master of anything, though developers could take Lloyd in any number of directions because of his versatility. His Tonfas, as I said, would make for a unique option. He should suit beginners to intermediate players best. Laura, despite being a simplistic character in the Trails of Cold Steel narrative, is one of my favorite characters just because of how hopeless she is at using technology, and there's a lot of comedy from the fact she's a tomboy who wants to be more feminine. Over the course of the 4 games, she embraces who she is more and more, and that's a great narrative, even if it's simplistic. With Laura in a fighting game, I envision her as being basically a faster version of Siegfried or Nightmare from Soul Calibur. Basically, hits like a truck. Also, let's face it, who wouldn't want to see Laura and Nightmare comparing swords? Wait, Mad Belmont? Why are you laughing so hard? Was it something I said? Anyways, with that out of the way, back to Laura. She would be suited towards intermediate to advanced players, and would have some jungle combos akin to Nightmare, making her super beastly in whichever fighting game she appears in. Ren, despite not being everyone's favorite character, could be a very interesting one in a fighting game. Her nickname, the Angel of Slaughter, alludes to Ren's more vicious side. She also uses a scythe, which is a relatively uncommon weapon. It's also comically large, like May's anchor. So this got me thinking, what if Ren is also comically fast, just like May? It'd be a lot of fun to see a scythe user who's actually able to do something, unlike the tortoise that is Zaslamel in Soul Calibur. I also think it'd be interesting to see Ren be a stance-based character as well, since she could either be an all-out aggro character or a full-on defensive turtle based off which stance you use. I think Ren should be a character targeted towards far more advanced players since stance characters tend to be harder to use. Speaking of stance characters, if you'd like to check out my video on how to make them more accessible to newcomers, a card should be popping up now. It'd also just be funny to see her dismantling the rest of the competition and living up to the Angel of Slaughter moniker. Also, since we're talking about stance characters, let's move on to another character who should be a stance-based one and be very complex at that. Kurt's another character developers could do a lot with. Dual blade fighters are not common in weapons-based fighting games. If you can think of any, let me know in the comments. We know Kurt is a speedy character in Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4, so he definitely will need to be a speedster in a fighting game. Kurt is also supposed to be used as a dodge tank, though given his short range, he is a bit gimped at that, but that's beside the point. This gives me the idea that Kurt should be a sidestep-heavy character, akin to Christie in Dead or Alive. We need more fighters like that in general, and I think Kurt Vander is a solid choice to represent that archetype. He'd suit intermediate to advanced players best. Fie might seem like an oddball pick in a weapons-based fighter, but hear me out. She has speed, she has gun swords. This would make for a fun character in either a 3D game or a 2D one. Give her some very short-range projectiles akin to Cervantes in Soul Calibur, and give her lots of mix-ups that are a mix of safe and unsafe, and you have a fun and balanced character. Fie's also a fan favorite, and would garner interest from that alone. I see Fie as a character who'd suit intermediate players, however more advanced ones could use her as a beast in more competitive environments. So, these are just some of the characters I could see guest starring in weapons-based fighting games. What did you think of the list? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you'd like to see me do a build the roster for a Trails fighting game, I can start work on that if enough people show support for it. Since this video was a pseudo build the roster, why not check out my Dead or Alive reboot build the roster? Or you could check out a video YouTube thinks you'll like. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.